Hey everyone.
No.
Hello.
All right. It's 5:03, so we're going to start. Happy to see you guys as always. For All Devs 35. Um, I'm going to pick note takers for this time. I was thinking about picking Ale, but he just left. Chad, could you take notes today?
Yes.
Awesome. Do you have the uh, link to the notes? It's in the chat.
Pulling it up now.
Cool. Um, Ale, if you can hear me, could you please take notes today?
Is that me?
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have the link in the chat. I'm going to nick it again, just in case.
Okay.
Um, all right. Do we have anyone new today on the call? Cool. Then we're going to jump straight to the updates. It's Aragon one's turn as always. First,
Yeah, I can give an update. The last couple of weeks have been fairly slow client-wise. Pierre has been mostly finishing Aragon UI 1.0. That will be out sometime this week. I think we're just on the repo itself. We're just waiting to cut a release and update our apps to make sure nothing is awkward with them. And there may already be a release candidate out on npm, but I'm not quite sure. But that will be coming out very soon, and then we'll get the full 1.0 published. The client itself, the only major change that has happened is with deep linking. We've added support for now inside the client, and we can talk about what that means and how to use that afterwards. It's one of the agenda items. Other than that, the SDK team has been working quite hard on refactoring the current CLI and getting it into a much more maintainable and stable position. We're looking towards the middle of December release for the new Aragon CLI version. And there's been an Aragon SDK working group formed around these efforts. They're on Rocket Chat and they meet on Tuesday and Thursdays for stand-ups, and I believe now there's at least 5 or 6 people participating inside these meetings and contributing work to the CLI. But I'll hand it off to Faku, I believe, if he's here. Maybe not. Okay, so Faku's not here, but I can also talk to him about the court. The court progress is progressing. The audit has started. I believe we are getting the result from the audit on Friday, from which point we'll know how much effort is left to fix things. As far as we know right now, there is nothing major that our auditors have found. So things are looking green and fairly confident. We're working now on some of the UI pieces for the audit. We're making initially now a phase 1 site to onboard jurors onto like the token, the ANJ token, and getting them committed into the court. And then afterwards, we're now designing the interface for the jurors themselves when they have to go through disputes. And that'll be something that we work towards at the end of the month before we have like more to show in terms of the designs, and through like the next 2 months as we prepare and implement that front end for the jurors. The launch dates for the courts, I am not sure if they've been shared publicly, but that is something that we should do as well. And I have the document in front, but it's essentially looking like middle of December release to do the pre-sale to onboard jurors onto the token, and then early February to mid-February, we'll have the court UI available for people to actually disputes or like resolve disputes, and then we'll do end of Q1, early Q2 for client integration with the court, because we'll need a whole bunch of contract upgrades in organizations for that to happen. And yeah, I think that's a good overview. Again, I don't think Faku is here, but I can pass it on now to Altar.
Awesome. Yep, Otak, please.
So over this past 2-week cycle, we had final push to mainnet. We've been focusing on collecting user testing and then fixing the issues that they've found and issues that are presenting themselves internally. We did our soft launch to mainnet, so all of our applications are up there now. But we discovered an issue on Friday where as soon as you deposited DAI into we deposited DAI into a mainnet organization, or it was done in testing, and we realized that the apps weren't properly handling DAI since it doesn't use symbols the same way. We implemented a pretty straightforward solution for that, but we're still working on an issue with syncing that's presenting itself only on mainnet as a side effect of that. But that should only impede us for maybe a day or so. While we figure it out, and then we'll re-release, and that should be it for the soft launch phase. We also finished off most of the reputation template for OE organizations with the multi-token options and new token manager. Going into this next chunk of work, our focus is going to be about half of the team is going to stay on support and maintenance. There's some refactors that we'd like to do to improve the way that we're handling state and projects and support the initiative of decoupling from GitHub, since we've heard a lot of feedback that basically having a non-GitHub linked version of projects is a pretty high priority for some groups. In addition, we're going to add features to add allocations to provide more visibility and allows for some more metrics for allocations, just so that people can get more of a macro view into them, including period length and detail views for each of the allocations. We'll also be providing, I'll be providing specification for the token API, and then as soon as that's approved by everybody and it seems to make sense, we'll move forward on development. We're hoping next week, but obviously based on the turnaround on spec and the conversations around that, we might have to adjust. We're going to make some small rad spec changes just to improve the information that's displayed to users in the application so far. And then we are working on finalizing the template and token manager audits. The core template and the token manager have gone through the audit process, and we've made all the requested changes, so those are basically wrapped up. It's really just the reputation template that we still need to handle some loose ends with. That's it from us. Owl, is there somebody from Owl here? Do you want to?
Yeah. I can give a quick update. Thanks. Yeah. So the first draft of the Aragon client integration with Quasar, which is like our IPFS pinning wrapper, is done and working. It sounds like Brett and like anyone else from Aragon One who could review that sort of stuff, it's pretty like busy right now. So I think we're going to just like keep experimenting with different use cases. Like the first one that we want to cater to is organization settings. So basically using Quasar to make sure that the organization settings data is pinned and only the like sort of permissioned people are able to pin to the organization's node, which to start would just be like an Aragon Association run node, but later on those could be self-hosted. Sort of the next step would be, after organization settings, we've been talking about exploring how we can support individual Aragon apps with this type of stuff, which might be like a different strategy and also require some Aragon JS changes to expose different API endpoints to pin stuff. Yeah, it seems like pretty deep in the weeds. We don't need to go down on this call, but that's where we're at with Quasar. And also, I finished a first version of 3box identity resolution and wrote some tests for that exposed some like bugs in the 3-box profile API. So that they've been working on improving that. Once they do, which I think is supposed to be later this week or early next, I'll like make sure the tests are running smoothly and submit a PR to Aragon JS. That's that.
Cool. Thanks, John. Thanks to Arthur and Aragon Black as well. I don't think we have anyone from the Mesh team today on the call. I know that Gabby is away in North America, so maybe not available. Do we have anyone from Aragon Black? I don't think so either. So that's on the Aragon application. Yeah, so I haven't been I've been off for the past week and a half, so I think that uh, 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 you guys have been able to see like the new structure of the association and the announcement by uh, Luis. I think that's the biggest news that was to follow. Of course, like we're working on different interesting things to submit to the community. Um, I mean, nothing too crazy, but yeah. Uh, I think that's that's all for from our side. And then we can jump on the discussions. I think we have two topics today proposed by Brett. The first one is multicollateral upgrade. Brett, do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, I mean, this is more like, I guess, a heads up / general discussion of like what we do around the shift in DAI. As I understand it, the upgrade to multi-collateral DAI is happening next Monday at some point that day. And from that point onwards, we'll have essentially two DAIs. The new MCD DAI will be DAI, and the old single asset DAI will be Psi. I'm not exactly clear yet. I haven't looked specifically as to whether or not the maker team will be changing the token symbol and the token name associated with the new Psi or like our old address. But this is potentially going to be an issue with all front ends that handle DAI, for lack of a better token name. And also to like, yeah, we'll have to upgrade all of our like verified token lists to make sure that we have the new MCD DAI. I'm not even sure yet if they've deployed the new token address and they're just like waiting to actually use it, or if they've communicated what that address will be. But this is something that, yeah, I'm not super sure we'll get day one support for in terms of MCD DAI. This sounds like something that we'll likely want to do an upgrade for towards the end of next week, hopefully Thursday or Friday, once we actually have the contract and balances to play with, to make sure that it's working properly on all of our applications.
That's funny. So whatever we're working on now with our DAI thing, it's only going to work for a week.
Well, I don't actually know what token they're going to be using for MCD, because they had a discussion at some point in the past that was like, oh, should we actually use an ERC20 this time for MCD? And it's unclear whether or not that is the case. So I actually don't have so many technical optics on this to know with full clarity exactly what the switch will be, and their documentation. I haven't found any for like token integrators to look at so far. But curious if other people have as well. Yeah, I'm guessing that's a no for other people who have looked into this. But But yeah, I mean, so in general, this is just something more of a heads up that potentially someone should start looking at in whatever team or app they're involved in, just to make sure that the new multi-collateral DAI is handled well. What will become Psi will also disappear in a few months. They haven't communicated exactly when either, but they're hoping to do global settlement on the current existing system at some point in the future. So it will just like, I mean, everyone's balances will just disappear at that point in time.
Got it. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to react to this first topic. Otherwise, we'll jump on to the second one. I think that's proposed by Brett again.
The second one was deep linking, yeah?
Yep, exactly. That's it.
Yeah, so deep linking is available in the apps. Between Alteryx and Aragon One, we've been talking about ways to enhance what is currently available in deep linking, because there's specific things that the current API doesn't allow for. But for now, at least, applications can support URL deep linking into their apps. They can change the URL based on navigation from user input, as well as like, I don't know, whatever the app wants to do essentially. So you can do things like voting/vote/for to bring you into a specific vote. And that capability is available, and that allows you to create a link to like go straight to whatever it is you want to show people. What it does not allow for right now is internal navigation between applications. So you can't go from like the voting app into finance. If you're like, oh, this vote was made on finance and I want to go back to finance. It does not allow for that. And that's something that we've been discussing as to how we would do that. And we just essentially need an API design decision. But it's not something tremendously difficult in terms of coding. It's more of an API thing. I guess I just wanted to both announce this, but also give people an idea that this is really, really simple to do. I can put in the chat and the pull request that essentially changed the voting to make this change, and it's like fairly brief, and it's available now as well on the nightly versions of Aragon of the client, and it will be released as part of 0.8.4. So if you wanted to start testing it now and integrating it, you can do so.
Yeah, I think our plan is to start looking into integration sometime next week for this, and then also get a plan and figure out like to what extent we need the like internal linking, and then figure out a path forward for that. I know that one of our big use cases for the deep linking is the forwarder integration too, but I think that at least doing the initial integration as like a phase one for that, and then making the changes with the like internal app deep linking after that probably makes sense. So we'll have some more feedback on that probably going into next week.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, in general, this is just a feature add for like things like projects and probably dot voting too. Even without the forwarder integration, it just allows people to make better links to show people.
Quick question. How do you like identify which sort of like event to step into? Like what's the ID sort of schema behind that?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, John.
Yeah, I'll probably just follow up on like GitHub or something, or individual chat. Can you post the PR in here? Oh, here we go. Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, essentially what happens is the app tells the client, I want to navigate to a different URL, and the client will say, yes, you're allowed to, or no, you're not allowed to. And if it allows it, you'll get a subscription or like you get a new event on a path subscription in the app itself to say, hey, like the path has changed, you should now navigate to something else. But you can see in the pull request, it's like generally pretty easy. It was like 32 lines of, it was really just 16 lines of added code that we had to write.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I guess actually like a better way to phrase the question was the example you gave was like voting/for. But like in this case, what is the for and how did you get that number?
Right. So that's generally app specific as to what UUID you want to use, or like primary key. In voting, we have a vote ID that starts from 0 and increments up to UN max. And that uniquely identifies each vote in that app. So we've used that number for that. But you could as well use anything else that is fairly unique.
Gotcha. So apps themselves have to potentially like support deep linking. There's not kind of just like a generic way to support all apps.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's on each app to figure out how to do routing. For example, projects will likely use a different routing mechanism than perhaps just this unique number. But it's totally up on what the app needs.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. Great. I think we have a few missing notes on the DICE section. Brett, if you want to add a few things there.
Thank you.
Yeah. But thanks, chat, for the notes. And we're pretty much in advance for this all devs. Does anyone want to bring something before we end the call?
Louis, I added another topic, perhaps for you as well, for Youth Waterloo, just to kind of get a gauge of how that event went, because I know a couple people in this call went to it.
Yeah, so I can speak on this. I think, from our team, it was me, Chad, and Kevin, and then we saw Gabby there as well, and Matthew. I don't know if either of them are in this call. But the main takeaway from us was basically an interest in exploring the graph more. What's the status of that? Because I remember there was some forum posts on that, and I think that Olivier was working on a schema for that at one point. But is there still any traction on sort of trying to integrate with that? And what would people's interest be in us trying like at least like a proof of concept schema and seeing how it worked with an app initially? Any opinions?
Yeah, the initial discussion on the graph for the client itself basically stalled. I also do eventually at some point need to respond to that forum thread. Maybe now is past the due date. The idea behind it, though, was that the graph may not be so useful in the client because it would put someone at an operator's burden, whether that's an app developer or the association hosting like apps that are powered by the graph in some way. It just added like more complexity to the app developer's life that I felt wasn't really necessary if we had other mechanisms of doing so, especially with better performance around ETH nodes. But it is not to say that the graph is not useful. We're planning to use it in the court and perhaps in the next versions of fundraising when there's a discovery platform, or in things like Aragon PM, where we could have a registry full of repos and things like that. Those are things that the graph is really well suited for. But for the client itself, I was not super keen on adding it for each app, or at least by default.
We definitely didn't envision any sort of like client level integration. I think if anything, it would be sort of like an alternative approach to state handling in individual applications. But yeah, I don't think that an expectation of that as the main state management at the client level makes sense.
Arthur, I'm curious. Like, how did you guys come up with like this output like on the graph, and did you get feedback from users like our devs that we needed to be to have like faster loading time and stuff on apps, and or
Yeah, I think that faster loading times are definitely something that people would like to see. Um, yeah.
was it like, so was it in the um uh, was it at it Waterloo that you got this feedback, or
No, we more just explored the tool more there. We talked to the people that were like presenting on it, and it seems pretty easy. The only complicated part is the schema development, but it seems like their tooling's a lot more mature now. So like there wouldn't be as much difficulty in trying to go in this direction as like one solution to the pre-existing problem that there is some friction around like initial loading time. It's also just nice that we wouldn't have to eat that initial loading time cost on a per device basis. Um, yeah,
cool?
so it was more that we explored like the viability of the tool. We didn't get like specific user feedback that the initial loading time was a major issue for people there. Especially since I don't think that developers are the ones that would have that feedback as much.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a viable path if you want to look down it a little bit farther. I mean, one thing that was, I guess, questionable at the time, I believe it was in May, that we had a different discussion on this, was how exactly you'd get the graph to track each of your app instances, because it was still, I mean, the graph is still really good for like a single contract deployment, which is more similar to what we have with, or like hard-coded contract deployments, which is what most protocols and other ones have. But if you're having a whole bunch of dynamically generated contracts, it gets harder to keep that state inside the graph.
Yeah, so this was one of the feature ads that they've done recently that was like really appealing to us. Is they're doing this sort of like dynamic graph generation thing now, where you can watch a factory, and then as long as you have like a rough schema present for the contracts that it'll be generating, you can develop the subgraphs on the fly. This also gives us the ability to start doing some more like cross-organizational analytics, because we could watch like a DAO factory and then get a subgraph that represents data on all of the organizations that have been spawned from that. So in terms of like specifically solutions to cross-organizational analytics, I think it's potentially one of the best options right now. But again, like that specific use case for it is not the one that we would start exploring initially. I think just like developing a basic schema for an individual application is like more immediately useful. But yeah, they have dynamic subgraph generation now, which seems like it sort of solves what you're describing.
Yeah,
Something.
Go on.
Something that I'm interested to explore more, and I had a short conversation with Jonathan Schwartz about this right before this call, is this possibly overlaps with the like IPFS storage or like Quasar node per organization that we've been toying with, where an organization could possibly have its own like when you start a new DAO, you might also spin up or like on the DAO's node, in addition to running Quasar, it could also run their subgraph. That's something that I feel pretty vague on right now, and I just want to have more conversations about if that's possible. It was also interesting that they are planning to launch a decentralized network next year. So we wouldn't necessarily need to run our own nodes or utilize their SaaS platform. So that's kind of just how I'm like toying with it in my own head. Not a suggestion for everything, just something that I want to explore more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely big on this model too of running like an organizational node. or a node per organization and having more data storage inside that. The only question I would have with the graph is the schema generation, because I mean, that's just a big question mark. How do you load how do you dynamically load schemas into an
I
organization?
picture it almost being something we talked about, and it feels like a big task that we wouldn't actually want to do. But it's almost like it almost feels like an alternative to the current script.js paradigm to me. And instead of writing a reducer for your script.js background script, you would be writing a subgraph mapping. And we could potentially, and this is what I'm saying is probably like not in like too much effort for what it gets us, but we could potentially make script.js use the same mapping syntax, so that you can run your own. You can choose as an individual member of a DAO to run everything client side, or to use the graph node.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the only question I have with this is like, if you install a different application into your organization, how do you change your organization subgraph? Or do you just restart it with like the knowledge that you have another subgraph to keep track of?
I think that goes to watching the like the factory contract, but I think Arthur has a better mental model of that, so I'll ask him.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that would sort of like create issues is so I think at the organizational level, it doesn't make sense to be watching just a graph. I think at the cross-organizational level, it makes sense to be watching the organizational subgraphs. But if you were watching that one organization subgraph, when you're in an individual organization, I definitely see issues with situations where you're switching from an app that has the schema implemented to an application that does not have the schema implemented. Is that sort of like what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of both. That's one tangent as well. So like whether every app developer is going to need to develop a graph schema backend that they need to plug in somewhere. But also, like, if I'm in an organization and sure, I start with the template apps and there's a schema for that, what happens if I add another app, or if I want to stop reducing one of these apps? Is there a way for me to like graft on another schema from a different application I just installed? Or is it essentially, like I was saying, just you restart the thing completely with this new schema in mind?
Yeah, I don't know if you can like graft one on. As far as I know, no, but it's not something that I've looked into.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, worst case then, I guess you just like remove your current node and restart that node and get it re-indexing, and it's kind of the same thing as before.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like I'm excited about this in the especially in the context of trying to make sort of a Web 2.5 layer for organizations that aren't like ready to fully go Web 3, where organizations could run their own node, or it could be like a SaaS offering potentially. The whole like fiat on-ramps and all that kind of stuff is another piece, but this seems like it might be a path forward to implement part of that Web 2.5 layer should an organization want it. So more exploration is needed for sure. And Brett, your questions were great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree that we could definitely have more exploration into this to see what the current capabilities are. And it's something that we might just want to do like every 3 to 6 months, just to check in and see, like, did our use case yet, and what are the pros and cons from before?
We also had a long conversation with, I think his name is Ford Nichols from the Graph team, and they were very interested in hearing our feedback, and if we have feature requests, they want to hear those feature requests. So if there's something it doesn't quite support yet, that would like let Aragon fully adopt it, I think they would really want to prioritize that.
Yeah, by us saying, even if you build this, we're not sure yet, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we could say, you know, that's just part of the negotiation. But yeah, I think even if it were that, they would want to hear it. But they would especially want to hear feedback if it were like, the only thing missing is X, right?
What's the plan in terms of like leveraging this for the courts? Like, where in the state sequencing do you plan on taking advantage of it?
And this will be the only state that gets reduced from chain. So the idea with the court is that the court fits really well into this model because it's a hard set of deployed contracts that we can even manually provide to the reducer. And each of these have events that get minted, and we essentially reduce a very simple schema from those events. And because of this, it's really, really simple to set this thing up, and it makes a lot of sense. And if you wanted to use the court, but didn't want to use the Aragon 1 or Aragon Association version of the graph, you could theoretically take the schema and run it yourself and connect the UI to that instance instead.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, so really the big thing here, if we're going to clarify it against the client and the court UI, is the court UI has contracts that are just very like what we call it, deterministic. They're non-dynamic, and you know in advance what they're going to be, and you know exactly what the schema looks like in advance. Whereas with the client, it's a lot more arbitrary as to like which applications are going to be loaded, when they're going to be loaded. The schema as well may change over time, depending on what the app's functionality looks like, or what the front ends may need from the schema. So there's all these other concerns that make that, I think, a harder challenge for the client than for the court UI.
Cool. Are we done with this, Arthur? I found.
Yeah, at least the graph stuff from ETH Waterloo. Was there anything that anybody else had from ETH Waterloo?
Yeah. So on my side, I want to circle back on that. I didn't have time to sync with Gabby and Matthew, but maybe we can. On the outputs that they have on their side, but I hope that's interesting, and we can chat about that on next All Devs and probably like on the forum. So yeah, I think that's it. Do we want to bring up last topic before we close the call?
I just want to have a quick check-in with Arthur. Were you still planning on going to, was it Boston Hacks or something else? I don't know if Gabby was still going to do it, but he was also potentially interested sometime before.
I haven't made any firm plans, but it's definitely something that I can still do, especially if there's interest in us having a presence there. Yeah.
When is that?
It would be more of like a traditional hackathon for mostly university students. And I think it's coming up quite soon. It's like either in the next week or the week after or something like that. But it's not to say that we should commit to it, but it was more of like a status pulse. Like, do we think we're going to be successful if we are there? And if so, or like if we have a good feeling, can we do it?
I think from my perspective, it makes more sense to aim at something that gives us some more time to prep. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I ideally like the next thing that we go to once we start like trying to target these more general hackathons, I think it's really important to have like the tooling ironed out to the point where we don't expect there to be any hangups in somebody getting from the point where they're like consuming the tutorial, the initial tutorial, to making UI changes to a contract that they've created themselves. And I don't necessarily think that we're at that point. But I think that we could be pretty soon if we want to push towards that, and then like, target a more general hackathon to potentially like sponsor or something.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
And
Cool.
then, yeah, as far as hackathons go, sorry. Hello?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I hear a lot of feedback. Okay. Yeah, Arthur, we haven't been talking a lot about this, but it's something that Ola and Javi and I have been talking about. But we're just talking to like Griff from Common Stack about potentially collaborating on a hackathon ourselves, since that was part of our AGP, is to do some hackathons that we have like bounties and prizes for. It might be a virtual one. So yeah, if other people are interested in talking about this more, just let us know. We can start like a communication channel somewhere.
Yeah, Yalda, on that, I think we can have a conversation. I don't know what's going to be the role of the association in terms of events and stuff, but we can chat about it offline.
Okay,
See if we can collaborate and help and stuff. Yeah, I think we're done for today. Anyone wants to add some like one last element to the conversation? All right, then we're done for All Devs 35. We'll see each other in 2 weeks, I guess on the 25th of November. And was great to have you all today. Yeah, have a great rest of the week, guys. Thanks again.
See you, everybody.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye, all.